So picture this. You have to build a skyscraper, but not on solid ground, in the middle of a swamp. That's pretty much the challenge the very first city builders in ancient Mesopotamia were up against. Let's dive into the absolutely incredible engineering that let entire civilizations literally thrive on water. I mean, it sounds completely impossible, doesn't it? How on earth do you create huge, permanent buildings in a landscape that's just constantly shifting mud and water? This was the central problem the ancient Sumerians had to crack. And their solution, well, it was nothing short of revolutionary. So what was their secret? It all comes down to these truly remarkable structures, which people have nicknamed floating cathedrals. And they weren't built of stone or brick. No, they were literally woven together from the marshlands themselves. And you don't just have to take my word for how amazing these were. Listen to what the British explorer Gertrude Bell wrote when she saw one back in 1920. And get this, she wasn't describing some ancient ruin. She was looking at a living, breathing piece of architecture. You can almost feel the golden light filtering through those woven walls when she describes it. Glorious indeed. This architectural marvel has a name. It's called a Mudhif. And for at least 5,000 years, the people of these marshes have been building them. You can think of it like a giant community hall, a place for weddings, funerals, big meetings, and the whole thing is constructed from one single, humble material: reeds. No nails, no wood, no glass. Okay, so why reeds? To really get that, we have to understand the environment they were living in. You see, the Sumerians weren't just building on the water. They learned how to build with it. They had to learn its rhythms just to survive. You know, Mesopotamia was really a land of two halves. Up in the north, you've got this vast, dry desert. But down south, where civilization just exploded into life, it was a totally different world. We're talking about a huge region, 15,000 square kilometers, of restless marshes and water. This was not a static landscape, it was alive, and it was always on the move. This whole ecosystem had a pulse. Twice a day, every single day, the tides from the Gulf would surge inland, pushing fresh water deep into the river deltas. Now, most people would see that as a destructive force, a total nightmare for building anything. But the Sumerians? They saw an opportunity. This restless land demanded ingenuity, and boy, did it spark some of history's first major innovations. So how did they do it? They're in a land with no real stone, no timber for building. What did they do? They turned to the one thing they had an absolute ton of: the giant reeds growing everywhere. And this wasn't just a clever choice. It was a complete revolution in thinking. And they built with unbelievable speed. A full-size Mudhif could go up in just 3 days. 3. Here's how. First, they'd create a floating foundation called a Kibasha by just layering reeds and mud. Then, they'd take these huge bundles of reeds, like massive columns, and plant them in the foundation at opposing angles. Now here's the magic part. They'd bend the columns towards each other, and the tension would create these beautiful, high parabolic arches. That's the spine of the building. To finish it off, they'd just cover the whole frame with woven reed mats for the walls and roof, even leaving some with open patterns to act like windows. As it turns out, reeds were pretty much the perfect God-given material for this environment. They have a high silica content, which makes them naturally water-resistant. Turns out, insects and other pests don't really like them either. They're fantastic insulators, keeping the inside cool in that blistering heat. And best of all, they're super flexible, incredibly durable, and absolutely free. It was a perfectly sustainable building model, thousands of years ahead of its time. Now, this mastery of reed architecture wasn't just for single buildings. No, this was the technological spark that allowed tiny villages to grow into the world's very first true cities. We're talking vast, complex metropolises that were quite literally woven into the landscape. And just to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, take the city of Uruk. At its peak, around 3200 BCE, it had an estimated population of 50,000 people. 50,000. That is a massive urban center by any standard, ancient or modern, and it was all supported by this unique relationship with the water. And the growth was just explosive. Sure, small settlements had been around for ages, but things really took off around 5000 BCE when these city-states like Uruk and Ur were established. In just a couple of thousand years, they went from small towns to sprawling urban powerhouses, which led to a golden age built on their incredible skills in irrigation and flood control. What's really fascinating is that these cities each developed their own kind of personality. Uruk, for example, is where we get the first writing system, cuneiform, which they pretty much invented to manage the bureaucracy of a huge city. Ur became an industrial powerhouse for weaving textiles, and later Babylon rose as a center for political power, law, and science. They were all woven together by trade, by culture, and by that shared challenge of mastering the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So what did all this lead to? Well, the legacy of these woven cities is almost impossible to overstate. The solutions they came up with just to organize life on a massive scale, they became the foundation for basically all of human civilization that followed. Their innovations were profound, and they weren't just random discoveries. They were born from very practical needs. They needed to transport goods on reclaimed land? Let's invent the wheel. They needed to track all the grain surpluses from their irrigation? Let's invent writing, cuneiform. Even the way we measure time, the 60-second minute, the 60-minute hour, they came up with that to track the stars for agricultural planning. It was all tied to the predictable cycles of water and the harvest. And their impact goes way beyond just technology. The very idea of a city, the concept of a written code of laws, large-scale organized agriculture, the first banks, which were really temple-based loan systems, organized government, all of these huge fundamental concepts of how we live together in a society, they originated in Mesopotamia. They created the blueprint. So it all leaves us with a pretty big thought, doesn't it? In an age where we are desperately searching for more sustainable ways to build and live, what can we learn from a civilization that created magnificent, lasting cities out of basically nothing more than mud and grass? I think their story proves that sometimes the greatest challenges are the very things that inspire the most profound innovations.